Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX with me, Devika Chopra. After crunch talks in Jeddah, Ukraine has now endorsed the American proposal for a 30-day truce. Kyiv has agreed to immediate negotiations with Russia. The positive response from Ukraine has prompted the Donald Trump administration to lift a freeze on military aid and to predict the beginning of the end to the 3-year war. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has hailed the outcome of the talks, stating that the ball is now in Russia's court. Meanwhile, even as U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff heads to Moscow, Vladimir Putin has listed 3 uncompromising demands. Firstly, Kremlin demands Ukraine's formal commitment to neutrality with no deployment of foreign military in the country. Secondly, has stressed on Ukraine's abandonment of any NATO aspirations. And last but perhaps not the least at this point in time, Putin has demanded international recognition of Russia's claims over Crimea and territories in the Donbas region. In response to this, Donald Trump has issued a warning that the US could do very bad things to Russia, which could be devastating. Even so, he has also expressed optimism that the US is about 80% of the way to getting this war finished. But what really do we read between the lines? I take that conversation forward. I have with me Ambassador Manju Seth, former diplomat, Major General Dhruv Katoch, Director of the India Foundation, Pathikrit Pine, geopolitical analyst, and Adit Kothari, founding member of the Indic Society, with us. Let me begin this conversation with Ambassador Manju Seth, if I can. Ambassador Manju Seth, the Donald Trump administration really patting itself on the back right now for what they've managed to get out of Ukraine, which is a 30-day truce. At the end of the day, ma'am, Donald Trump said that Ukraine had no cards to play. So, with or without American support, Ukraine perhaps would not have been able to continue this war, and therefore it would have anyway agreed to what America is proposing. The actual person that has to be convinced here is Vladimir Putin and not Volodymyr Zelensky. How do you think America will now navigate that situation? Because I've just listed 3 very clear demands that have already come in from Russia. One is, of course, no NATO aspiration, and that's something that perhaps the United States of America will convince Ukraine on. But the third demand, that Russian occupation of Crimea as well as regions in areas of Donbas have to be recognized. How will the United States of America convince the rest of the world that that's a legitimate demand being made by Russia?
I think, sorry, I think it's a kind of difficult situation now for everyone. But yes, everybody wants peace, and I think Vladimir Putin is also digging his heels in for a negotiating advantage, whereas the US is saying we'll put sanctions on you, and again as a negotiating tool, I believe. And now I think, and of course, as you very rightly said, Ukraine doesn't seem to have a say, and it appears that Europe, also the EU, also seems to be out of this. Though they are also impacted, but they also seem to be out of it. But convincing the world and convincing even the EU is not going to be easy. But given President Trump's style of functioning as we see him in the second term, of how he has gone back and forth, putting pressure, withdrawing, doubling down, and then and he could do it even. He could continue doing that on other countries as well, putting tariff pressure or other kinds of pressure, and sanctions as a kind of Damocles sword hanging over everybody to get his way. But it's not going to be easy. But given that everybody wants peace, some kind of via media, I believe, will be found. Crimea, I think, is by and large has had. There's no option. Nobody took any special umbrage at the time it was occupied. For the Donbas region, yes, there will be some pushback. And for NATO, I think again, Ukraine and NATO will have to give this assurance. And as you very rightly said, the US is inclined to not be supportive, very supportive of, or cut down his support to NATO, and asking the European Union to, or other NATO members, European members, to to fund it and to start contributing to it. So it's not going to be an easy task, but I believe that since everybody wants peace, some kind of settlement, but not, yes, they will not, but Russia, I believe, will not completely vacate every part of the country that they've occupied. That was one of their conditions, that we will, it all belongs to us. But I think that would be difficult for Ukraine to also sell to its constituency, and for Europe to accept it. But I believe that the way things are headed, there might be some kind of resolution to this. And I also think that the EU will have to be involved, Europe will have to be involved in the negotiations as they move forward, and to get a conclusive and sustainable agreement from all sides.
Major Dhruv Katoch, bringing you into the conversation, sir. Does it really now seem as though Russia will eventually get what it wants after waging this 3-year war? Because in terms of its demands, firstly, the NATO aspect, which means US-backed military will not be allowed on Ukrainian soil, but very categorically, Russia has also said that Ukraine must not allow any foreign army or any foreign military on its soil, which essentially means no backing from Europe either in the future. If those conditions are met, what is to say that Vladimir Putin will not aim to annex all of Ukraine one day?
Thank you, Devika. Devika, as far as the terms and conditions are laid out, let me put across a few things. Crimea has always been a part of Russia. Even when you look back into history, a few centuries ago, in that famous poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, that action where 600 British troops were killed took place against the Russians in Crimea. So Crimea has been a part of Russia. It was only when it became the Soviet Union that it became an administrative sort of arrangement that it came under what is Ukraine now. So I don't see the Russians giving Crimea under any circumstances. That is out of the question. The only question was really, as far as territory is concerned, is the Donbas, and the majority of the population in the Donbas region, they are Russian speaking. The Zelensky regime has committed a very large number of atrocities against the Russian speaking people over the last decade. I don't see them going back to Ukraine. So I think territorially we are looking at a situation which is as is where is. Russia will keep what it has taken, and then a line will be drawn. New borders, in my view, are going to be drawn. President Trump threatening sanctions is not going to work. Russia has been under war and under sanction for 3 years, and they have done quite well. It is Europe which is facing the backlash, so I think they are going to compromise. NATO is out of the question. In the similar manner that the Americans did not accept Cuba getting nuclear weapons, Russia is not going to accept Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. So I think all these are out of the question. The bargaining chips perhaps may be quite different. What Ukraine is going to lose. Zelensky has already created a situation by which the biggest loser in this entire battle is Ukraine. The European Union, the BAE, all the defense manufacturers, they have become filthily rich in this war. They have gained. Ukraine has lost by their blood and sweat, and I think they will lose more if they don't go in for a peace treaty. So that is the way I look at it. I don't see any further compromise, but the war will end. Lastly, I don't see Russia taking over the whole of Ukraine. It's not going to happen. Russia is not in the position to hold Ukraine. They are only holding on to the areas which were Russia-speaking, Russia-dominant. If they take over the whole of Ukraine, theoretically, militarily, it is possible. But I can also assure you, it is impossible for the Russian military and their establishment to hold Ukraine. So that is going to be out of the question. Ultimately, we are going to see a ceasefire and hopefully a long-term peace, but a ceasefire and on the present lines. There may be a bit of adjustments here and there, but I don't see too much adjustments, and that is the way it's going to be. Devika.
Mijan Dhruv Katoch, at the same time, what do you think becomes the future of Volodymyr Zelensky at the end of a peace deal or even a truce?
I think Zelensky has to go. He has betrayed his country. And it is time for the people of Ukraine to tell this man enough. Everything which he has done has led to the destruction of his country. He has played into the hands of the West. And I think that is a very, very dangerous sign for any leader. Don't do it. You have to look at your national interest first. I think he subordinated the interest of Ukraine to his own personal interest and to the interest of the Western lobby. He has to go.
Okay, let me bring in Adit Kothari into the conversation as well. Adit, while, like I said, the US really patting itself on the back for what it's managed to get out of Ukraine at this point in time, we've also heard that there is a top Kremlin aide who has come out and said that there's not much in these talks for Russia. He is in fact laughed it off, saying that this is, the entire concept of this truce or the peace deal or whatever it is that America and Ukraine are proposing at this point in time does not seem as though it has anything in it for Russia. How do you think US is going to navigate this situation?
I think you're right, Devika, because the aide did come out to say that Russian interests need to be prioritized, and that is why Steve Woodcock is in Moscow, where I believe that he's also going to be meeting Vladimir Putin, if I'm not mistaken. So demands are going to be put forward, and as far as Vladimir Putin goes, he sees Ukraine as a sovereign. It's an issue of sovereignty. It's not so much of an issue of the West here. He doesn't acknowledge Ukraine to be a sovereign nation, and that is where the fundamental problem arises, and that is where Trump's navigational issues need to be looked at. So all of the deals, all of the demands that they're going to be putting forward, which is basically the NATO peacekeeping missions will have to retract themselves. Ukrainian army will have to be basically reduced. They see Zelensky as an illegitimate leader and as an illegitimate head of state for Ukraine. So all of those demands will obviously need to be catered to. But most importantly, like General Katoch and Ambassador Said basically mentioned, it's about the area of Donbas and Crimea. What happens to them? What sort of demarcations do they actually agree on? But all in all, I think Ukraine is the bigger loser in the grand scheme of things. And the people of Ukraine have paid immensely with blood and sweat and and their lives. But also we shouldn't be taking away from the UK and EU as well, because they are also losing out somewhere or the other. The coalition of willing, as Prime Minister Starmer has basically conjured up, where basically they're trying to get like-minded European nations to canvass around for support against for support for the Ukrainian people, people and its army. It shows that EU is not willing to back down even now. So that is, for me, the biggest challenge that Trump needs to navigate. It's just not Russia, but also the sort of liberal nations from the EU nations that need to be navigated and mitigated. Devika.
Okay, Pathikrit, bringing into the conversation as well. Pathikrit, how do you think the US is really going to navigate those talks with Russia? Because Russia has been very clear that so far there's nothing really in it for them. And how crucial is it for the US to then crack this? Because yes, Donald Trump has been saying, and he has in a way proven, that listen, you could not have fought this war without US military aid or US financial aid. But what he's not been able to prove so far is that you can't end the war without the US either. It's really critical that his administration is now able to go to Russia and convince Vladimir Putin that listen, we do want this war to end, not just for American interests, but we will keep Russian interests in mind as well. How is he really going to build that trust with Russia at this point in time?
So, Devika, first and foremost, we must understand that this problem that exists between Western Europe and Russia is literally a 1,300-year-old problem. It started from the Fourth Crusade, literally, and this animosity between the Eastern Orthodox Church versus the Roman Catholic Church is not today. So there has been innumerable times that Western Europe literally have attacked Russia, and this was not the first time this has happened, and this was perhaps would not be the last time either. So first and foremost, there are 2-3 things Western Europe needs to be told, that especially today, if you look at Western Europe interest, it is basically EU. It has to be told that it cannot continue for long, forever. So I think if you have to end the war, Trump has to speak to EU rather than Ukraine. Because this was not a war between Russia and Ukraine, this was a war between Russia and Western Europe, with Americans playing a very big role, in which I think Trump administration has sidelined itself, but it is primarily the Western European interest who do not want this war to be over. So if you want to finish the war, speak to Europe, especially Western Europe, because they are the ones who are pledging 700 billion euro, talking about giving more military aid to Ukraine, if and as and when United States withdraws itself. Secondly, Trump has to himself be very stable about what he wants. I think from the recent news, it has already again started sending arms to Ukraine, maybe in bits and pieces. There is a certain kind of schizophrenic approach in it, And third, and a very important issue is this: Russia wants Ukraine to remain as a buffer zone. You cannot have an eastward expansion of NATO anymore. So if that pledge is not given, because everything, the root cause, I think Putin has been saying this, that you must get into the root cause of what is of the problem. The root cause has been the breach of the pledge of 1994 and the eastward expansion of NATO. And therefore, unless European Union or literally Brussels, the Brussels lobby, until and unless the Brussels lobby acknowledges and admits and accepts that there will be no more of eastward expansion of NATO, this conflict may still have a minimum of a ceasefire. The problem will not get sorted out. And Ukraine, the best way for peace for Ukraine is to have a neutrality. That has been the issue for a long time, and they must go back to that. We must understand that the war was on the verge of getting over barely within a month from the time it started in February 2022. It was the Brussels lobby led by Boris Johnson and also patted and backed by Biden who stopped it from happening. And therefore, I reiterate, we are on the cusp of, as Trump had literally mentioned, if there is a larger conflict, it would not be a world war, it would be a European conflict as the First and Second World War has been. So the root cause is European Union. The root cause is the Western European aspiration for conquest or finishing the incomplete agenda of having control on Russia or having a regime change on Russia that they could not do even this time. So unless that issue is sorted out, I don't think Putin will agree to anything else. General Katoch was very right. Look, Russia is a literally de-dollarized economy today. Russia has been sanctioned so much there is no more you can sanction them. And America is not numero uno anymore. You have a BRICS which is doing reasonably well. Russia can do reasonably well and doing well with business in a de-dollarized environment with many other countries, including India. So if Trump has to change things, it has to keep in leash the Anglo-Saxon lobby. Whether he can do it or not, we don't know. He has committed a lot, he has stated a lot, but his ability, America's ability to finish a war today is far less than what it was perhaps 20 years back. And that is the harsh reality Trump is facing right now. He may have said many things, but it is difficult to do unless the supply of weapons and funds from the Western Europe to continue with this 1300-year-old animosity stops. Back to you, Devi.
All right. Ambassador Manju said interesting point there is by Patikrit. I want to bring in your thoughts on this. Donald Trump says that if Russia does not agree, very bad things will happen. Now, that's just Donald Trump's style of speaking. But as Patikrit pointed out, that over 3 years, you have placed sanctions. You have provided military aid, you've provided financial aid, you've provided intelligence to Ukraine, European countries have been involved, but thus far you have not been able to, in a way, hamper Russia's motivations or hamper the nation itself. So what are the cards that Donald Trump has when he says that we will hurt Russia if it does not now come to the negotiation table, or that we will place banking sanctions? Because as Patikrit pointed out, Russia has been sanctioned so much that they have in fact managed to come up with their own systems and associations, bilateral associations with nations that have allowed them to continue on without the dollar for the past 3 years. Yes, the Russian economy has taken a downfall. Yes, it has been dented. But what is it that keeps them going, or or makes Donald Trump think that there are some more cards that he has which haven't been played so far?
I think very rightly mentioned by Patikrit, this is going to be not an easy situation for the US. Russia has managed to survive. One of the main aims of this war was to start all this war and this confrontation was to downsize or to make Russia a weak nation and to sort of make it irrelevant in the scheme of things. But I think that has completely not happened, and it's the agenda that, or the intention that they set out with has not been been possible. And as you know, the thing is that what cards does US have? It doesn't have any more that many more cards in it. I think especially they can just prevent the oil and gas completely from anybody buying it. I think that's the only one thing that they have by increasing their own production and trying to influence other countries not to purchase at all. And because the sanctions are also in place. Because when initially the war broke out, Europe was still buying from Russia. We were able to buy from them, and so the sanctions that they had put in place against Russia were sort of not implemented for quite some time, strictly implemented. So now I think that's the only. I think that seems to be the only other alternative remaining for Donald Trump. Not many things are there from what we can make out, and definitely Russia's position has not been as weakened as was intended, and they have managed to de-dollarize their economy quite a bit. They're teaming up with China has also helped them. I think they're bilateral, and with this, I think Trump does realize, and America does realize that pushing Russia into a partnership with China is detrimental to their interests. So I think this is only a kind of negotiating tactic, I believe. I don't think he has any strong action that can possibly be taken that will influence Russia, except I think Russia, when it wants peace, it has spoken of the earlier accord in 2020 when they discussed with the Biden administration in 22, the Istanbul negotiation that they are talking about. But one Trump's Middle East envoy saying yes, we can discuss it, but his special envoy for Ukraine says no, even it's not on the table for Russia. So I think it is not a very clear-cut approach by America, especially given President Trump's tendency or his the way he approaches the whole problem. He doesn't. It's a little unpredictable. So the only thing that is predictable about President Donald Trump is his unpredictability. So we don't know how he's going to react. Sometimes he doesn't really take all aspects of any situation or any action before he makes announcements. For instance, even for the tariffs that he imposed on Mexico and Canada, he had to put them on hold twice, and because it started affecting the local the American economy, and now even recession is being spoken about. So it's not going to be easy for President Donald Trump also to sanction or to further put pressure on Russia. So they will have to negotiate. Both sides would like to negotiate from a position of strength, and Russia has said, and I think for the NATO is not going to expand. I mean, that is one of their main demands, and I think US will agree to that. And ceasefire is also a kind of breathing space for both sides to negotiate. But whether a sustainable long-term solution is found, very much the European Union has to be part of these negotiations. Britain will have to be on board.
Okay. Adit, I'll leave the last word with you. Your thoughts on the same. What cards does Donald Trump have at this point in time to bring Russia to the negotiation table?
Not much really, because they've thrown everything they could potentially as a country, as even Patikrit pointed out, as a union of Western forces. They've thrown everything at Russia, and Russia was always prepared for it. So they had their mechanisms that they sort of navigated through these difficult and challenging times. Whether it was China, whether it was India, and the more they throw anything at Russia, the more there is a risk of pushing them into the camp of the Chinese, into the arms of the Chinese, and that is something that you do not want. So it needs to be a very calibrated approach. Trump and Putin have a chemistry together. They've worked together previously, where even Trump has candidly come out and said that in 2004, when Russia attacked Georgia, it was under a different precedent. And again, when Crimea happened, it was again with a different precedent. So I am the only one that Putin is comfortable working with and has worked with in the past. So there is something that there is some sort of a chemistry that Trump and Putin have. Both are men of very, very different nature, and they will be able to engineer something out of this. The only question that remains is how much is Ukraine going to end up losing as a consequence when this peace deal is actually signed or engineered, and what happens to the mining aspect of things. So that remains to be seen.
Okay, all right. That's all the time that we have, and I thank all of our panelists for joining us on the broadcast to take this conversation forward. With that, viewers, we slip into a very, very quick break.